Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Jay Sticky.
And I'm Kerry McCain.
Kerry McCain, welcome to the show. You have been a long-time person in Denver that comes to all our meetups, and you're awesome. Thank you for coming on the show, because you're going to tell us about something we don't know about, which is virtue.
Wait, have we not had you on before?
Thank you for having me. No, it's my first time here.
It feels like it shouldn't be.
I do listen occasionally.
It really feels like it shouldn't be your first time, because you're so active.
You're a fixture in the community here.
Totes.
That's weird.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to do that and have you on a bunch, like till the point where you get sick of it and stop answering the phone.
All right. We'll see what happens when we get there.
Right on.
But unlike us losers, you actually have virtues, which is pretty cool.
I try. Do my best.
And do you know something about the ethics of virtues?
Yeah. So this is something that I'm interested in personally. I haven't really formally studied philosophy. I wanted to do some more, but I just took a couple classes in college. But it's something that has always really interested me, and done a lot of reading on my own about it. I brought a couple of books here that I've read to talk about those.
There are sticky notes all over the books as proof that he has read them.
The one I took really good notes on. The other one I actually listened to as audiobook and just had the paper one for reference.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you had to pay for it twice.
Yeah.
Brutal.
But it was worth money.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is something that I maybe know more about than you guys, but probably less than some people in your audience. So feel free to eviscerate me on the Discord or whatever.
Okay, we will do that. I'm sure people will be happy to. No, they're very nice on our Discord.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, so we were talking at the last meetup, and I can't remember how virtue came up, but it happened just to line up perfectly, because it was just earlier that week where I kind of formulated my thought on this. And I feel like this ethical journey might be more common than just me and Kerry, but I'm exposed at some point in my late teens to utilitarianism, and I'm like, oh, this is obviously right. Mm-hmm. You know, like the logic is incontrovertible, and like, I guess I'm utilitarian. And then you live for a few years, and you're like, I'm not living like a utilitarian. Oh, I can't. Okay, well, I'll just be like a bad utilitarian then. Mm-hmm. And then I guess there's just something where I realized, like, that's not even. It seems like that's not the way that I even want to live my life, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what I want to do instead is like, and that's we talked about this a bit when we did Not Everything is a Clue. Like if it's a big important decision, if I'm making the God that's going to take over the next world, right? Mm-hmm. Then I'm going to do it, the right way, with as much math as I can, right?
Yeah.
But most of the time in my life, that doesn't come up, right? Mm-hmm. Like, is the most useful use of your time to like pull over and help somebody whose car is stuck on the side of the highway? No, you could be home working and donating that money or something, right? Mm-hmm. Like, but that might be the most useful way for you to spend your time, right? You feel good, you've helped somebody, like, everybody wins.
Yeah, I guess society is made better if everybody does this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you give less money to charity because you could have spent that time being maximally productive or whatever. But I don't know. It was just like, I guess I realized that like I kind of went on like this circle of like, okay, I guess this isn't actually the way to do it. And really, you should just try to focus on like having a good life. Put goodness out around you, and that'll improve everyone else's life, right?
The problem is like us as nerds, we meet formal systems and math first. Yeah. And we're like, yeah, this is right. And then we meet humans much later in life, and we're like, oh, this doesn't work for humans. And then you got to adapt things so that they are human usable.
Things don't just come with number values generally, and so eventually you realize you're just making up all the numbers anyway and just going with what feels right.
Which is actually reassuring, because when I said live a good life, that's very poorly defined, but it's as well defined as like a udal, right?
Right.
So maybe Kerry can help shed some light on like anything specific there. But
yeah, I'm not. I think it might be possible to actually better define udals than that.
Yeah.
One goodness unit.
Well, so there's this thing. I guess maybe I should say first, like, I had a similar journey to yours, Stephen. Mine was more, I didn't have a strong opinion about it until I read Scott Alexander's Consequentialist FAQ, where he argues hard for consequentialism for like 4 sections, and then like takes a weird left turn and says, okay, now that we've established consequentialism, let's talk about utilitarianism, which I'm not going to argue for, because that's how consequentialism works. Mm-hmm. And I was so convinced by the first 4 parts that I thought, well, okay, I guess I'm along for this ride now. Let's see how that goes. Mm-hmm. And just always had some reservations. There's this thing with utilitarianism. So it has to do with if you've got a set of options and, or I think this might be true of any set of objects generally, like sort of set theoretically. If there's certain axioms which, if they're true for this set of things, then you can construct some sort of function that enables you to choose between them, right? So if you have, say, 10 options and it's true for every option that maybe you can put them in order with each other. A well ordering mathematically, I don't know if it has to be, it might just be a linear ordering. But so like if any two options, either you prefer A to B or B to A, or you don't care. And if you prefer A to C and you prefer C to B, then you prefer A to B.
I think Stephen and me argued about this at one point.
Yeah, so like essentially, there's these axioms. These are the Morgenstern von Neumann axioms, I think they're called, and they have this result where if you have this preference thing, you can turn a list of preferences as long as it meets these criteria into utility function. And so there's a sense in which that way, I know people like to talk about preference utilitarianism versus like total whatever hedonic or util whatever utilitarianism. Yeah. Those are in a sense the same, right? At least I think the people talking about them believe them to be the same. Preference utilitarianism, which is the kind that says you try to satisfy people's preferences,
right?
Versus, I don't know, hedonic utilitarianism, which tries to like measure outcomes. They might not be actually measuring the same thing, right? You might be optimizing for preference satisfaction versus something else, but in the sense where like I always heard people talk about preference utilitarianism and think like, well, why is this even utilitarianism? Like, where are the utils here? That's where the utils come from.
So way back in the day, God, I think it was still in the teens of our episodes. We had Alonzo Fife on.
Oh yeah,
and because he was someone I was following a lot in my younger years, and he is. Desire utilitarianism is his philosophy, and which is basically a slightly different take on preference utilitarianism. Desire, preference, not much difference, right? But anyways, we had him on. I've been following him for a long time, and I think what the thing is you evaluate the preferences rather than evaluating actions is the thing. So a preference utilitarianism would say these preferences are good and these preferences are bad because of their consequences when promoted throughout a population, rather than just I'm trying to.
I think that might be desire.
Fulfill people's preferences.
That might be desire stuff. Because I think preference.
That might be desirism specifically.
I think preference utilitarianism is saying I'm going to maximize your preferences. Like so.
Well, that's just utilitarianism.
But not necessarily, because a hardcore whatever like pure utilitarian might press a button against everyone's wishes to wirehead them, because then they'll be super happy.
Okay.
Right, even though none of them would have wanted that, right? Except for a couple of awesome weirdos.
So it's So it's better. I see. Okay.
Yeah. So you're like, okay, well, I'm going to maximize your preferences, and your preferences might not necessarily be like the most hedonic outcome or whatever, right?
Right. You may have stupid preferences, but
you probably do.
Yeah, I know.
You probably have inconsistent preferences. Which
I know. I do.
Yeah. So like the. Neumann von Neumann Morgenstern axioms might not even hold, and so you might not be able to validly construct a utility function for them all.
I have preferences to eat candy and to be healthy. It's tough. Yeah.
Right. Okay, cool. Thank you for clarifying that then, because I had a wrong thought in my head.
I'm not sure if I'm right.
Sounds like an interesting idea, though. I haven't heard that one before.
I mean, it's basically, in my opinion, just another way of having virtue ethics, because the virtues are the desires that you want to instill in people, right? And I have a desire for fairness. The virtue of fairness is what is being pursued here. It's that kind of thing where you evaluate the individual desires people have and like these are good desires that are harmonious within society and we want to promote them, whereas these are bad desires and we want to reduce their prevalence because of the disutility they bring when people have these desires.
So I don't think that. Well, that's not how I would put it, I guess.
Okay.
I think there's maybe two levels here that are going on, and one is sort of the level of how, for some given goal, how should you accomplish that goal?
Okay.
Right? And so utilitarianism often takes as a given greatest good for the greatest number or what have you. You know, it's like some
total utility.
Right. And then you've got the method of, well, calculating what the outcomes in terms of utility are across some aggregation function. Maybe you add it up all over everybody, or maybe you don't because you're afraid of the repugnant conclusion, or you do something weird to add these up, and then you get one number and you say, whichever number's bigger, I'm going to do the one that leads to the bigger number, right? But that's totally separate from whatever it is that you're trying to maximize. You could be maximizing the greatest number for the greatest good, you know what I mean? Or you could maximize like the number of hairs on the number of cats in the world.
Right.
Or you could maximize anything, right? But the goal that you use to pursue it is by, counting up some relevant quantity of interest and then picking the action which leads to the highest value of that quantity. Mm-hmm. And whereas virtue ethics it really focuses on developing character traits and habits. Mm-hmm. So you might say, you could do a greatest good for the greatest number thing, and rather than say every time I'm going to make a choice, I am going to, add to the greatest number. You could just have some notion of what the greatest good and the greatest number is, and whether you calculate that explicitly or not, if your approach is cultivating in yourself habits of character that lead you to automatically, habitually, without thinking about it, without having to do the calculation in your head, doing the thing that generally will produce the right outcome, and also sort of cultivating this discretion about when to do it and maybe when to break your habit. That would be applying sort of virtue ethics to a utilitarian goal.
Right.
But I think virtue ethics also typically comes with its own goal, which it tends to be motivated in teleological terms, and we can get into that. We don't have to get into that right now, but it's sort of like maybe a thing would be, this is where like human flourishing and eudaimonia sort of notions come from, but sort of be the best version of you, try to live well instead of merely living. So it tends to be a little more personally oriented, in addition in its goals as well as its methods.
I tend to think that virtue ethics or some version of virtue ethics leads to the best utility overall, just because it's been selected for over the millennia for these things tend to have the best outcomes when humans tend to act this way, as opposed to trying to individually calculate the utility of every little thing. If you just always try to instill these virtues in people, things tend to work out for the best. But I think we may be jumping the gun a little bit. Kerry, what is virtue ethics?
I think virtue ethics is the thing I just described. So virtue ethics is a system of ethics that focuses on developing habits of character. It dates back, I think, to Aristotle and was the main tradition of ethics sort of until Kant. And later after Kant, Mill and Bentham, utilitarianism, so until the Enlightenment, basically, which sort of started with Descartes or Kant.
Speaking of Kant, isn't deontology just like a perversion of virtue ethics, though? Where the emphasis is on the actual rule as opposed to the virtue, but it's basically aiming at the same thing?
I think in deontology, if you act out of habit, you're not doing the right thing. It needs to be a conscious deliberation that you're using your reason to do. So, I think that is the case. If you habitually, hold the door open or something, right? Yeah. I think what you're supposed to do is think, this is what people should be doing, and then do it.
Oh, it feels like the opposite of the right way to be a human.
It kind of is. It's silly, I think. But I wanted to just...
You want it to always just be a habit.
That's because you want people to do it, right?
Yeah, right.
But I might be not being giving enough care to Kant, but I wanted to mention, you used a phrase that part of virtue ethics is making people the best versions of themselves that they can be. Do you guys now see why I called Ted Lasso a virtue ethicist? Did you watch Ted Lasso?
I did, yeah.
Oh. Well, sure. I guess in...
I don't know if it's a perfect fit, but this is where I was going with that.
I see the analogy.
Yeah. Right.
He just wants all his players to be the best thems they can be, even if they aren't winning games.
Because that's not the point.
Yeah. Which is, it's kind of crazy because it is the point in professional sports, but this is a TV show and we love Ted Lasso.
I'm not sure that that's something that really differs between a consequentialist and a virtue system here. So virtue ethics is sort of a meta-ethical framework as well, where I suppose that's the thing. So consequentialism says that it is the consequences of your actions that make something good. The Kantian sort of deontological thing is, it is whether you're doing the right act or the wrong act that makes something good. And virtue ethics sort of says that it is what kind of person you are, right? It's like, what are your characteristics? If you do the right thing once, then that doesn't mean that you're good for doing it, right? Maybe it means you're better than not doing it, but
right.
And if you do the right thing because you carefully force yourself to do it, or because you've carefully considered it and you make this choice, which is sort of what the Kantian would say is like, yeah, that's good. It's the intent that matters, like Stephen was saying. Then that is what makes it good. But I think in virtue ethics, what's good is having the habits of character that do whatever these things called virtues are.
I think there's one last wrinkle, and basically everything I know about virtue ethics starts and stops with Aristotle. So I think the school of thought has come pretty far in the last 2,000 years, and I'm out of date. But I think at least historically, ethics in the context of like Greek philosophy wasn't just like how we think of like morals. It was about cultivating like an overall good life. So it was not like where do I give my charity money or how much do I give. It's just like what kind of person should I be, right? Is that closer to the point?
I think that's another great thing. Is it was a broader question. Like we tend to think of these days as, especially among rationalists, as an ethical theory is sort of a decision theory. It's like when you're presented with a choice, figure out what are the choices are, and then how to choose the right one. And your ethical system should be the one that leads you to make the right choice. But there's a sense in which not everything you do in life is a choice. A lot of it is automatic. A lot of it is not something you're thinking about. And there's also another sense in which maybe you have this rule for making the correct choices according to some criteria. But how do you know whether you have the right criteria or not? Right? How do you develop that? And so I think in ancient Greece, the question of ethics was not how do I follow the rules? How do I donate the right amount to charity? How do I do whatever the correct decision is? It's more, what kind of life do I want to live? How should I live my life? How should one live? That's the question. How best to do it? And so virtue ethics is maybe tackling a broader question, although utilitarianism seems to be more about maybe the question of like how to do things for a whole society-wide level. So I don't know that it's maybe broader on the personal level, but the scope is smaller because it's more individual.
I think I don't know if this is just obvious and self-evident or if I am really projecting here, but I think, in my opinion, it is very obvious and self-evident that the whole purpose of ethics is to get people to be able to live together and do things together. It's what makes society function. Like, there is no ethics if you are on an island alone. It doesn't matter. You don't have other people to interact with. But what ethics is getting other people to do things that are pro-social. And so that's why ethics, focuses a lot on reward and punishment and what should you do and shouldn't you do. And I think virtue ethics, correct me if I'm wrong about that last part, but I do think that virtue ethics is the thing where instead of trying to evaluate each individual action as to, is this pro-social? Does this help society exist? It is more about like, how do we make humans that in general, just going about their daily lives and functioning, tend to have a society that exists and functions well? Because like the whole point of ethics is to make other people do stuff you want them to do and not do stuff you don't want them to do, right? Like, don't murder my family. Do please help me out when I'm dying. That kind of thing.
So then the best ethics would be you guys should all give me all of your money and I should never give you my money?
Sure, but that doesn't generalize, which is why that is not a good ethics.
Okay.
I don't know if I actually buy the premise that you have to have multiple people. I think that if you're stranded on a desert island, there are better and worse ways to live. Like, not just like better, like to increase your odds of survival, but like just you could be a better or worse person even by yourself.
I don't think that counts as ethics then. That's just like, does your life suck or not?
That's a really bizarre thing to think about, though. Like, for some reason, what popped into my mind was, okay, so you could, hunt and fish like responsibly and take what you need, or you could just set all of the trees on fire and destroy the island, and it's kind of.
Or you could just masturbate until you starve.
Yeah.
Or you could sit there and
like,
just.
how do you evaluate these though? Because it's for who? I mean, I keep when I'm trying to think of whether something is. Well, no, I mean, it could be for the plants and animals, or for the other people, who might come and settle on this island someday, or...
I'm going to assume that we're divorced from the other society, so you don't have to think about other people coming to settle. I guess whether the plants and animals on the island matter is up for debate. Depends on whether you personally think that plants and animals are moral characters, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a consideration, too. I'm just thinking, because that's almost more utilitarian. I think you could be a better or worse person alone in a cave, forever. Like... You could be miserable and hating your life in there, or you can try to be happy and, live as well as you can, Yeah,
but that's misery or happiness. That's not ethics.
Well, so that I think is where that's where the key...
Is it or isn't it, right? Like,
okay.
I think that there's... I don't mean to cut you off.
No, I'll let you drive. That was my thought on, like, if it's how should I live? If that's ethics, then that's definitely in the umbrella, right?
It doesn't matter how you live if you aren't interacting with anyone else. Like, literally, I just don't give a fuck.
Wouldn't you rather be happy than sad?
I would rather be, yeah. And so I would do things, but those aren't ethics. That's just me living in
Okay,
my
yeah.
life.
So I think then maybe we taboo ethics.
I think there's a lot of utilitarians who would say that is ethics. Who would say that, like, you suppose you're the only person in the world, or the only person in the world whose I don't know, happiness levels you can affect, right? I think that the way that utilitarianism, generalizes, condenses to that. The case of you're the only person is you have a moral duty to make yourself as happy as possible. at least under, because,
Who
or
is
to satisfy your preferences as thoroughly as possible.
Who is imposing that duty on me if no one else exists?
So I think that most...
I mean, to say I have a moral duty if no one else exists implies that there's some greater being or something, right? That is imposing a duty on me.
So I don't think this is a duty imposed on you by somebody, right? Like so you're a member of society now, right?
Yeah,
Like you're out here, there's people you can affect. Who's imposing on you the duty to try and maximize the greatest good for the greatest number, or whatever else it is that you feel like
Everyone
you should
else
do?
here.
So
The greatest number.
I'm not gonna like take a whip to you. And
I mean,
start
you say
cracking.
that now, but if I start like stealing from you and physically abusing you, you're gonna have some issues with
Well,
that.
maybe I'll stop hanging out with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a cost to me. I like your friendship.
Okay, so you're saying here that maybe ethics is like your sort of self-interest for you.
It's
Is that it's in the interest of you to have society going well and to be friends with people.
I mean, that's society literally created things so that it is in my self-interest to work well with society. Yeah, that's ethics.
Yeah,
You make it in people's self-interest to make society work well.
I think that is one view of ethics, that it's sort of what you should do. When we say something is good, what we mean is it's sort of in your enlightened self-interest, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are other versions of it that aren't that. And some of them are very weird.
Okay.
Some of them are like, morality is this, it's a separate kind of fact that doesn't really, it can describe things in the natural world, but it doesn't relate to them at all. Like the epiphenomenal consciousness people stuff.
Right, yeah.
Right. Like there's some versions of it that are like that. There's some versions that are like, morality is not real. When I say something's good, all I mean is I like this and you should too.
Yeah.
Or I like this and I want you to too, because should implies that there's a reason why you should.
Right. I mean, there might be some reason to. If other people also like the thing, then you might get more of the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think so if you look at like from an enlightened self-interest perspective, it could be that there are things that you want that you don't realize you want yet. Mm-hmm. Right. And maybe if you're all alone on a deserted island, that there are things that would be better or worse for you to do from the perspective of your own self-interest. Mm-hmm. And I think that this human flourishing, like become the best you, if you will, of virtue ethics, is not totally divorced from that. I don't think it's totally the same either. Well, I guess I should say I'm not sure if it's totally the same. It might be, but this is something that I'm not sure about personally. So
I'm of the opinion that there may be other formulations of ethics out there, but I am unconvinced that they aren't wrong. So, that's just my own personal. Yeah, that's just my opinion, man.
Whatever's true, there's a lot of wrong people out there.
Yeah, right. But I also think that like being the best you can be is something that is very beneficial for society, which is why society in general wants to encourage that in people.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it's not even necessarily distinct from this utilitarian greatest good, greatest number, right? Like maybe being the best you can be in this teleological sense. Maybe it's just like coming from a different angle towards the same thing of maximizing utility, by which we mean not exactly happiness hedonically, but like whatever long term. Everyone wants to use the same word, which is eudaimonia, to mean like this thing that is kind of like happiness, but it's not just happiness, because happiness might be like wrong, or it might be incomplete, or it might be, we don't want you to just be wire-headed happy. We don't want you to just have this pleasure. There are some people who bite the bullet and say, no, it's just happiness, or it's just pleasure. But in general, people sort of have the same notion of, shall we just say human flourishing, and agree that that's the goal, and differ perhaps about why that's the goal or how to get there.
I think Julia Gallup has the best definition of eudaimonia I've ever heard, which is happiness minus whatever philosophical objections you have to happiness.
Okay.
So it's like, all the things like, well, what about this? Like the not that part, right?
Right.
Yeah.
What about wireheading? The not wireheading.
Yeah, I do think that's a good one.
It's at least succinct. Flourishing is close, but it's like people think of plants or whatever, which isn't necessarily like the worst analogy, but it's harder to sell maybe.
Yeah.
But,
All right. So.
yeah.
Did we have any more on that before we move on?
No.
I maybe one more comment, which is that I'm throwing around this word teleological, and that
yeah,
might be
tell
a
us
fun
what that
thing
means.
to spend 10 minutes talking about.
Okay.
So it sort of means of a relating to like a purpose or an ultimate goal or function. So it comes from this Greek word telos, which means ultimate end or purpose or use. So you might say like the telos of a hammer is to drive nails. That's what it's made for. That's its purpose. A good hammer is one that drives nails well. A bad hammer is one that you try and hit and it keeps bouncing off, or it's not, like the nail sticks into the head and it can't quite go. And so there's this idea that this is sort of where virtue ethics sources its things. Like, how should I live well? Well, living well for a human is sort of like being a good human, in the same way that a hammer might be a better hammer or a worse hammer. And a lot of people these days, I think, scoff at this idea, particularly if you're not religious. You're like, I don't have a purpose, That sounds like this God stuff. That sounds like God made you to do X, Y, Z.
Right.
And I think maybe another trap is to fall into it and say, like, evolution made me to propagate my genes, and so therefore, like, morality is all about having as many babies as I can. I think this is where, like, the God shatter stuff comes in. Like, you're not whatever evolution was selecting you to be. And, you might or might not be whatever God created you for if you believe in God. And if you don't, then you don't have to worry about that. But that there is something that it means to be a human being. And if it can be something that you can be better or worse at, because you can be, McIntyre has this great passage that I actually have flagged down about.
You want to pull it out?
Yeah, let me pull it out. So he's talking about, getting an ought from an is, right? This is Hume's famous dilemma that no matter where you start with a proposition about things that are, you can never pull out something that should. Like, X is red, therefore you should run away from it, or you should stop at the stoplight.
I mean, that's a very crude example. I think you can get oughts from ises in some cases.
Not without a values insertion. That's his point.
Yeah, he says, like, you can't unless you already add another ought premise. Like you say, if the stoplight is red, I should stop at the stoplight. If you assume that you should care about society running and not try and cause car crashes, right? But then you're assuming this other thing that already has should in it,
right?
And he basically says you can't without a should. But McIntyre talks about, you can describe somebody. Suppose you have a farmer, right? From such factual premises about ises, like, he gets a better yield for this crop per acre than any farmer in the district. He has the most effective program of soil renewal yet known, or his dairy herd wins all the first prizes at the agricultural shows. It validly follows that he is a good farmer, right? There's something that it means to be a farmer. There's something that it means to do it better or to do it worse. And if your cows are winning first prize, you're probably doing it well, right? And so the thesis of Aristotle and of people who follow in that tradition since then is sort of that there is something that it means to live better or worse for a human being. And whether you want to call that, like, being better at being human, I think it is sort of similar to this concept of be the best you that you can be, right? Because it is sort of being better at being you. But people...
How strictly defined is this? Because I like the be the best you can be, but then when you say be the best human you can be, that sounds like there is one particular type of being human, and I'm like, there isn't even like one particular type of being me.
Yeah,
I don't like this idea that, like, if someone might be saying you would be a better human if you did this differently, and I'm like, no, that might work for, like, somebody who is, say, monogamous, right? But it's not going to work for someone who is not monogamous.
Yeah, so speaking only for myself here, I don't think that the same exact rules apply to every person, because people are different, right? And
so
that's why I phrased it as be the best version of you.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's possible to do better or worse than that. And that's sort of the rough teleological meaning. I think that it's possible to say that maybe there is no such thing, right? But I think if you're doing ethics, you probably think that there are, better or worse ways to live, however you mean to ground that. And if you're doing virtue ethics specifically, you're working in a tradition that says that sort of, right and wrong is sort of determined by whether it means you're doing this better version of yourself or this worse version of yourself, right? When we say right or wrong, we're saying, like, the right way to be a farmer or the wrong way to be a farmer. Like, if you're killing all your plants, you're doing it wrong. Right. Virtue ethics is essentially saying you can talk about your whole life that way. So that's the teleological bit is that good and bad aren't just these characteristics that exist out in the void. It's like good at chess, bad at chess, but good at living, bad at living.
Okay. Yeah, I've known a bunch of people that are bad at living.
I think
I've also known some that are really good at living, and holy shit, I want to be like those people.
Those people have virtues.
I suppose so.
I like the examples of farming and chess. I remember back in the day getting frustrated with like moral relativist arguments, and they'd be like, "Well, your version of good is just yours. Everyone's equally valid." But it's like I like the counterexample of health, and it's like that's like saying that everyone's definition of health is the same, is equally valid, and some people are just wrong. Like if your version of health is like, "Oh yeah, they're constantly vomiting and they're in pain and they're going to die in 5 minutes," like that's not the same as being 1975 Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know,
Right.
Yeah.
like that, granted, maybe neither of those are the peak, but one's definitely a valley, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's like, all right, let's just assume there's some boundary on this, whether it's like, all right, farming, great, where I'm prepared to say you suck at farming if all your crops die and all your animals are hungry, right? Like, and if you disagree, then by all means, you're welcome to enter the industry of farming, and you will be selected out when you suck at it.
And there's some universality. Like, there is the whole, like, people are different and they have different preferences or there's different ways that it's good to be Steven versus Ineash, but there's some universality.
You're saying like a good farmer and a good chess player might have some things in common?
Well, I think,
a good Stephen and a good Ineash might have some things in common, insofar as they're both human beings. You are both human beings.
As far as you know.
Well, I think what you might be gesturing towards there, Jace, is like virtues, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I don't mean it like tongue in cheek. I mean like that's the actual thing, and then and I'm curious what modern thoughts are on like what virtues are, because I think Aristotle got, I don't know if he hung up is maybe the right way to put it, but he got fixated on this idea, as far as I understand, of like virtues being the mean between two extremes, and the extremes were vices, and the golden mean, wherever that was like the virtue. So like courage is somewhere between like cowardice and foolhardiness.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly how that fits.
I have a list here of Aristotle's virtues.
Perfect.
Just in case something like this were to arise. Exactly like Stephen said, he was weirdly fixated on this fact that every virtue is the mean between two vices. So courage is between cowardice and rashness. Temperance was between insensibility, like somebody has no taste, and licentiousness or self-indulgence, who just like trying to satisfy your taste all the time. Liberality was between illiberality and prodigality, so it's like how much money should you spend. Like this whole list is sort of the list of how to be a good upper class person in
ancient Greece.
in like 300 BC Athens, because that's what he was talking about, and so and that's who he was teaching in his class at the academy. Actually, the book Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about this, it's famously kind of difficult to read because it's like his lecture notes.
Okay.
So you can read it, but it's not like it wasn't intended for an audience. It was just sort of his notes that he was going to refer to teach his classes at the academy.
It's 12 virtues, right?
Let me just read the rest. Magnificence is between pettiness and vulgarity. We got magnanimity, proper ambition and pride between vanity and undue humility. Yeah, some of these don't really fit. Patience and good temper. Truthfulness, wittiness, friendliness, modesty, righteous indignation. That's 1, 2, 3, 4,
Righteous
5, 6, 7,
indignation.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Okay.
Yeah, that's between envy is if you, I guess, righteous indignation is the mean between malicious enjoyment, spitefulness, schadenfreude. Like if you're happy when other people suffer, like no, you should be upset when other people suffer, but only the right amount.
Okay.
Because if you're too much, then you could be envious of their success.
Okay.
I don't know.
Or you could become an SJW.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of what I'm thinking.
There is a right amount of indignation. Like I think one of the things, it's kind of every characteristic that you could say is like, yeah, it's possible to overdo it. I can't think of anything that maybe it's not possible to overdo, because if there were such a thing, then that would be the definition of like the highest good, right?
Right.
Before someone says giving to charity, because it turns out you can burn yourself out in 9 months, in a month, giving away everything.
Yeah.
Whereas if you'd spread it out over the course of a lifetime, you could have given 10 times as much.
You don't want to neglect your children and have them out on the street because you gave everything to charity.
That too.
The thing with the virtues that slightly annoyed me, and I think this is just a mistake of some certain people, is that they get weirdly focused on like the specific 12 virtues or a different list of 8 virtues or something, and they're like, these are the virtues, and that always like turns me off. I'm like, I don't think there is a specific list of virtues that should be the virtues, right?
I don't want to say that there could not in theory exist such a list, but yeah, I totally agree. I think reading Aristotle and coming away with, oh, these are the 12 things that I should do, and then if I do these well, I'm doing morality right. I think that's the wrong takeaway. Absolutely.
Okay.
I keep thinking about, man, it's so hard to when you're talking about like being the best person, or like being the best farmer. I keep like sort of appending at the end of that for question mark. Like, are you being your best self for yourself, or for the rest of society? Like when you think of the desert island example, who are you being your best self for? Is it for yourself? I don't know.
I mean, it's generally for society, and that almost always coincides with for yourself.
I guess the sort of teleological argument wouldn't be that you're being yourself for anyone. It's sort of that you're just being better at being yourself. And that's what it means to be better, is it's not you're better for a reason. It's just like...
But what if you're a thief?
What if
Should
you're a
you
thief?
become a better thief?
So that's I guess what I was saying earlier about this. I think that a lot of ethical frameworks, and I think that utilitarianism is particularly guilty of this, they don't sort of leave room for growth, right? It's like you have your utility function, and then it's just how do I best satisfy that? But there's not really something built into the structure for what if I have the wrong utility function? How do I revise it and improve it?
Right.
Because then any change is going to be, well, I mean, maybe there's Pareto improvements, but like any changes in general likely to lower the utility of your current function. And so then why would your current function ever lead you to prefer something better?
Real quick, it's pronounced Pareto? Pareto improvements?
Pareto?
I don't know. Like, I'm asking because you are the one who went to college, and I'm like, oh shit,
Oh.
he knows the right way to pronounce it.
I don't know. I've
Oh,
only
damn
seen it
it.
written
Okay.
down. I say Pareto. It
Pareto.
might be Pareto.
Okay. I thought you knew.
Yeah,
'Cause, I always make
P-A-R-E-T-O.
My
My
game
best
theory
guess.
teacher always said Pareto,
Pareto.
but
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
it's actually Pareto, and
Pareto. That sounds right, kind of.
I always
Pareto.
I don't actually know what word you guys are using. So.
There's this
It's a dude's
guy,
name.
Pareto or Pareto, who did some work in game theory and some other stuff. So he's responsible for the 80% of the things take
Optimal.
20% of the work or whatever.
Oh, that was him.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
the
cool.
Pareto principle, 80-20.
Yeah.
He has skewed distributions, right, which is maybe where this 80-20 rule comes from. So like the normal distribution is symmetrical, and the Pareto distribution has the hump off to one side. And he also, this particular concept of a Pareto improvement is where, suppose you are trying to, I don't know, maximize two quantities, maybe across some like mathematical space, and you're just trying to find the highest point for these two properties. It could be that maybe you're at a peak, right? You're on top of a mountain. Wherever you go, you're going down. But it could be that you're on a ridge, and maybe you can walk over and go higher. One dimension the other, and so a Pareto improvement is sort of, or maybe you're playing a game like a prisoner's dilemma, but not a prisoner's dilemma exactly. And maybe you're both choosing option A, and we both get 5, right? But then maybe if we both choose option B, I get 5 and you get 6. That's better, right? It's not worse for me, and it is better for you.
Yeah.
That's a Pareto improvement.
There's the concept of the Pareto frontier, where oftentimes once you're at the maximum amount of like efficiency, the best way to do something, any improvement along one axis, like you want more guns, you get less butter, right? You can't, it's always a trade-off. You want more butter, you get
the
less
two
guns.
good a society needs.
Yeah, exactly. The only two things society needs, guns and butter. But you might not be at the frontier. You might be lower down where you can do something which will increase the amount of butter without reducing the amount of guns.
Exactly.
Like if you have inefficient cows or something, maybe you can upgrade your cows.
You threaten them with guns.
Yeah, and that would be a Pareto improvement where you have just strictly improved your situation without having to have trade-offs. But once you get to the frontier, the Pareto frontier, that's where you can't have any more improvements without some sort of trade-off somewhere else.
I've got
Right,
the settlement here. Vilfredo Federico Damaso Pareto. Pareto is how it's emphasized on Wikipedia.
Okay,
Cool.
yeah, he sounds Italian, so that makes sense.
Vilfredo sounds delicious.
Anyways, that was a tangent. What were we talking about? The virtues that people get stuck on a
so
list of virtues.
I was saying that something like utilitarianism doesn't offer you Pareto improvements necessarily. If you're going to switch functions in general, you should expect the new function to be worse at satisfying your old function.
Right, definitely.
And this was in response to Jace saying that that you were hung up on this reason of like, why should you
for
be doing the
whom,
thing?
or what? Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you doing ethics for? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately the teleological answer would be that given that you are a human being, your existence is of a certain kind where you will find that if you do these things, I don't know if it grounds out in happiness or eudaimonia. Like I don't know if it does or not. So I trying to phrase myself carefully here, but I might just say I don't know if it does or not. But suppose for a moment that it does, then we can use the language to say that given that you're a certain kind of being, you'll find that you will, I don't know, enjoy yourself. You'll flourish best if you do this thing. And so you're sort of doing it for yourself in that sense.
Yeah.
If you choose that you don't want to, I don't know, somebody might say, you're mistaken. You actually do want to. You only think you don't want to.
Yeah.
And maybe you'd find that out eventually if what you're doing now doesn't result in suicide.
That sort of thing always makes me bristle. Like, fuck you, you don't know me.
I think all sorts of ethics ultimately are about that, right? Like you were saying, you're trying to tell people what to do.
Yeah. But when I try to tell people what to do with ethics, I know that it is because I want society to work better and that it's not always for their personal improvement. I mean,
then why should people want to do it then?
Well, hopefully if society is working correctly, then it will improve their lives because society will reward them. Yeah, but it's not inherently for their improvement.
It's
because society is functioning well and rewards things.
They're likely to benefit from it, but it's not necessarily the case.
It's collateral damage.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. If you set up your society well, then people will be rewarded for not murdering others, even if it would otherwise have improved their lives.
So you're thinking of like the case where some great artist is like, I'm done with art because I got my heart broken over. It's like, no, but you're too good at this. The world needs only stuff that you can do, right? Or stuff that only you can do. Mm-hmm. You resent somebody telling them that. Or I guess not resent, but like that's what rustles or Jimmy's a bit because it's like.
I mean, the thing that would rustle my Jimmy particularly is saying you would be happier if you accepted Jesus into your heart. Let's say something like that. Or you would be happier if you just picked one person and dedicated your entire life to them and be completely monogamous or something. Like those sorts of things are like, that may be best for some people. That's not for me. You would have a better life if you settled down and had children and raised children because children give life ultimate meaning. Like, yeah, maybe for 80% of the people out there, but not everybody wants children. Not everyone finds meaning in children.
I noticed the difference between your examples and mine. Yours is saying you'd be a better person if you did what society is telling you to do.
Right.
And my example is you'd be a better person if you did what you're best at.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the difference. Maybe that's, I think, and it's not necessarily like, I wouldn't necessarily tell somebody if they're done doing something that they should, but I can see where someone would be like, oh man, but the world is missing out on the thing that you could be doing, right?
So where do you draw the line between maximizing, like doing what is best for you versus for the rest of society? Like if you are, this great artist, but painting is making you miserable, like at what point?
Yeah.
Let me consult the list of 12 virtues here.
I was about to say, maybe that is where the virtues come in.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some sustainability element there, right? Mm-hmm. Like you don't want to flame out a month in, but I'm not really sure. Like also, how sad should you be doing it for the betterment of everyone else? I want to say if you're sad doing it, you shouldn't do it. Like, and that's probably where it goes against some utilitarian grain, which is like, if you're a little sad doing it, that's worth it for the greater good.
Right.
But like, and I guess that's true. Like if you give money to charity, you might be a little sadder than if you spent it on hookers and blow, but like, there's some level of like hedonic points that you're willing to give up to do the right thing, but I don't know.
That's why you want to set up society to make people feel better when they give to charity and feel worse when they get hookers and blow.
What are your thoughts, Kerry?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting conversation. This is a thing. This actually leads to something else that we were talking about the other night, which I did want to include in this conversation. So that's good.
Tell us.
It's that like this. I listened to that Very Bad Wizards podcast, and they did one episode on something by Thomas Nagel or Bernard Williams, I forget who, and about how people sort of don't. People seem to have this different morality for public versus like private, for individual versus like if you went to see, I don't know who started the war in Vietnam, if that was LBJ or I don't know, Nixon or Kennedy or somebody or other in the 60s. I don't remember my history very well for that part, but like if you went to that person and you might shake their hand, right? And you might say, even if you disapproved of their policies, you might call them Mr. President. You might have a polite conversation with them. Whereas like if you were talking to some random person who blew up and shot as many people as died as a result of that war, you probably would not treat them with that level of respect.
Right.
You wouldn't be excited about it. And I guess the argument was that this sort of indicates that maybe humans have different approaches to morality for when it's sort of private versus public. And I don't know if that's like someone who's empowered with this power of running the state maybe has different moral expectations. But I sort of have this thought keeps coming back to me because it really seems like utilitarianism is about what are the best rules, what are the best incentives, like what can we do to make society better for everybody. And it seems like virtue ethics or also deontology mostly aren't about this, right? Like Kant does have that categorical imperative that like do only what you can do as long as you will that everybody would do it. I'm not sure that makes a better society, right? Because there's some weird ways around that. Or maybe that is what it was doing. But like it does seem like there's sort of different things going on. Like how much should you trade off your pain as the painter against society's gain from your the pleasure of your beautiful paintings? Well, utilitarianism has one answer to that, and it's add up how happy everybody gets from seeing your paintings and then figure out how sad you get from them. And well, boy, there's a lot of people in society, so probably you should keep painting and deal with it, right? Or keep painting to whatever maximum extent you can to produce the paintings, taking care of yourself as needed, however that is, right? And I do think, I don't know if this is Julia Galef or someone else makes the point in an EA context that taking care of yourself in a sustainable way probably isn't working yourself almost to the bone, because that's not sustainable. That's not, if you're the painter who's going to be depressed for life and doing these paintings, maybe you're going to, in a fit of artistic melancholy, kill yourself at whatever age and then deprive the world of all those future paintings. Right. And so even if you are thinking in this utilitarian sense, probably it's usually good to keep yourself happy and able to continue doing whatever work that you are doing, even if that work is small, rather than doing a big work. So I'm not sure that the conditions really diverge here, but it does seem that one of these is fundamentally concerned with sort of society as a whole, and one of them fundamentally isn't that much. I do think virtue ethicists would say that, yeah, society will prosper if people are virtuous. That will be good for everybody. Yeah. But I don't think that will be good for us collectively is the idea. I think that it's good for you individually to do this, regardless of however society is structured, right?
I like that. I think any virtue ethics that has evolved successfully over hundreds or thousands of years will naturally tend to be one that is good for society, because otherwise, it would be replaced by a virtue ethics that is better for society. But the fact that it focuses on the individual rather than on the society, I think makes a hell of a big difference.
I know it certainly gives me, it's a little more encouraging to me.
Because ultimately, that's the only person you can work on.
Yeah, sort of. You can influence others.
Yeah.
You can teach children. The example of the painter, I find that I have really different responses internally to, like, should you force this painter to continue painting for the good of all versus what if this was the world's best doctor? I feel like it's morally repugnant to like force the painter, to be miserable. But when I change it to a doctor who, could cure, who just could save tons of people, then suddenly I'm like, no, he would be an evil person to not do that. That's a bit extreme, but I'm trying to.
At the writers' retreat I was just at, one of the people was a former ICU nurse and ran into that sort of thing all the time because hospital always chronically understaffed, and it was a situation of like, I've just worked a 12-hour shift, I can work another 4 hours and maybe this person won't die, but what do you do when like you can just keep working yourself to the bone, or you can go and fucking lay down and have a nap and eat a dinner and people die instead? Like, it's really hard for me to say that you were a bad person because you didn't just keep spending every single minute at the ICU saving people.
I liked that conversation between Superman and Lois Lane.
I was just thinking of that.
Yeah, that was spot on. I'm glad we're on the same page. Yeah, it's he's like, no, I'm at the movies. Yes, I can hear everyone dying in other parts of the world, but I need time for me. Yeah. She's like, you're a monster, and he's like, am I though? Like, could you do it? Yes. No, I don't think you could. Like, there has to be there's a trade-off, right? Mm-hmm. And I
don't want to say that anyone is bad for not doing that.
Yeah, I think if you're miserable like that, and that's maybe again, one person's misery doesn't counteract 1,000 people's happiness, but I think,
some point,
but like if you're counting the numbers, but I think if you don't count the numbers, it's like you shouldn't be miserable.
Yeah.
You know, you get X decades. If you're sad for most of them, that's a bad life. That sucks. That shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, I think at some point you start saying the bad people are the hospitals that don't hire more nurses, or the bad people are the person who decided I would rather be an accountant than a nurse because it's less stress.
Or the morons who refuse to put on their seatbelts and keep arriving in the ICU.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You
Well,
know.
I mean, like personally, I like accounting because if I don't like who I'm working for or what I'm doing, I can just be like, fuck you, I'm going home, fire me if you really want. Whereas as a nurse, if I were to do that, if I was being maltreated by my boss, this person could die if I tell my boss to fuck off and I'm going home, and that sucks. And so maybe the real monsters are the people who decided to be accountants and programmers and other things rather than ICU nurses. And so put the blame not on the ICU nurse is what I'm trying to say here.
Sometimes the system is just the circumstances are just a drag, right?
Yeah.
You know, like I jokingly blamed the people showing up, but it's not really their fault. Sometimes people are reckless. You know, people are hurt by fireworks every year, even though it says right on the thing, "Don't blow this up in your face." But
do not light and then insert into nose.
Right. You know, there was a. You know, I think I didn't follow it that closely, but I think there were at least a sentiment of like we should treat people who are showing up, with COVID, a year after the vaccines come out. We should treat them like last, or at least not 1st.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was true or if that was just something that people said, but like. At some point you're like, all right, look, you're making this hard on everybody because of you, not because of like, stuff outside your control.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't quite know how to solve that riddle. At least not right off.
I think anyone does.
Or maybe Kerry does.
People have different opinions about what that answer is. I didn't have more thoughts then. I was waiting to see what Kerry was going to say.
No,
maybe it would be a thing
really
of like
to contribute either.
Virtue ethicism would help a person feel a certain amount of responsibility and cultivate a certain amount of anti-laziness. What would that word be? Studiousness? I don't know. And like
industriousness.
Industriousness.
Yeah.
There we go. A certain feeling of responsibility and a certain industriousness that keeps people doing good things, but not so much that it's pathological. And like that's my problem with utilitarianism, because utilitarianism does not have any end point.
Yeah. It doesn't have that trade-off.
It has exactly one. When the thing that you're sacrificing is of comparable moral worth to the child you're not saving.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So it's like, well, this cup of coffee, shit. That's X. That's a X percentage of a life, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as the thing you're sacrificing is of that comparable moral worth, that's the cutoff line.
And that humans can't live like that. That is a pathological ethics system that makes people feel bad for not, for thinking, I just went to a movie that is 1/100th of a child's life to go to this movie and get popcorn.
It was a great short story. Remind me what it was called.
Are you talking about me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I used that example because I was in my short story called I See Dead Kids.
That's what it was. Yeah. I like the title.
I wasn't trying to,
No, I'll plug it for you.
Okay, thank you.
I See Dead Kids. You can Google it. It's online. Eneasz wrote it.
It is.
Yeah.
But I still like effective altruism. I think it's a good thing. I just have this one particular problem where there is no philosophical reason not to go absolutely nuts, and I think virtue ethics can help mitigate that.
So yeah, I think it would, right? Like I think if you were, so I've read Singer on the Life You Can Save. I think EA, I think probably everyone agrees who's going to be listening to this that EA certainly gets it right that insofar as you are being altruistic, you should be effectively altruistic. You shouldn't waste your money.
Mm-hmm. And that some things are more important than others, even if they are equally effective with how they use your money.
Right. And I think also EA gets it right that, and Singer gets it right that you shouldn't just not care about people who are far away from you. Right? I think that this is maybe just me personally is that I feel like I don't have any sort of moral obligation to people who are outside of my community. Mm-hmm. And Singer's argument is, and there's different levels of community, right? Like my direct family, my brothers and sisters and my dad are not on the same level as like the people who live across town from me, who are maybe not on the same level as like the people who live in America, but on the other side of the continent or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think Singer makes a good argument that no, people who are far away from you very much in the world, in culture, in any sort of, who you've never heard of, you do have some level of obligation to them. But I think that the utilitarian thinking, which counts everybody equally, is maybe not modeling psychologically how people think about this. Mm-hmm. And I would say that insofar as it does treat everybody equally in terms of who you have an obligation to help, that I think it's actually wrong. I think it's correct if you're like a policymaker or, president or an AI who has the power broadly to affect all sorts of different people. It seems like the prescriptions of utilitarianism are sort of the same prescriptions that we would apply to an uncorrupt, unbiased policymaker, right? Like, you shouldn't favor your family more than anyone else. Yeah. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. You should try to do the greatest good for everybody in a society as a whole, even if that means people are worse off. But I don't think that you as an individual human who's generally not in a position of large power and responsibility has the obligation to care about people in that fashion. I think that you're going to have circles of concern, and that those will include people who are far away in the world.
But there's a preference order, sort of.
Yeah.
It's not even just a preference order, and I don't even know if it's just like a discount, because I think as long as it's numerical, this problem will exist. As long as it's like, what if there's a billion drowning children, right? Well, if you only care about them 1% as much as your neighbor, well, there's way more of them, and they're way worse, and so you have an obligation to help. I feel it's a sort of, I don't know, it's not a Pascal's mugging exactly. I feel like that sort of argument doesn't hold. I feel like you have a very limited obligation, and that's limited not in terms of, it's partly limited by the good that you can do to people who are very distant from you, who are outside of most of, very only in the community of all humans are in the community with you. Yeah. But I think that is also, there's some finite amount, whatever that happens to be, I don't know what it is, that you can expect it to be responsible for. Maybe it's 10%, and Giving What We Can has it right.
What if your sister has some illness and it's gonna cost you like $300 to buy her medicine, but then you're like, but the same $300 could cure the same disease for an entire village of people in Ghana?
I think that's where like
and then it's sort of like, what if you don't like your sister and you've been estranged?
Well, like, sure,
for a while, but I think society would still say you should help your sister.
Well, if he's your neighbor that you hate, then I think you're under an obligation to do stuff. It's weird.
But what if it's your sister that you hate?
Yeah, I don't know if that should matter, but I just liked that what Kerry was saying kind of was reminiscent of what I was saying before, which is like, when I take a God's eye view of like, what should I do? Utilitarian makes if I'm in a Rawlsian original position designing the world, then yeah, I'm not going to just pick my friends, right?
Or if you're in Congress.
You're right. Yeah, you'd be a dick. Like if you're going to build the world from scratch and privilege all your friends and family, but if you're in your life and you're just living in your human meat suit with your squishy brain that likes your friends more than it likes strangers that you've never seen and never will see, like you're doing the best you can,
And I think, honestly, that's not just you're doing your best you can. I think that is morally correct if you are a small, limited human, because I'm going to take the question of do you hate your sister out here, because hatred really complicates things a lot. But
yeah, sorry, I was just sort of making the question more difficult for fun.
Okay, but I think like if you have $300 to save your sister or $300 to save an entire village, the correct thing is to save your sister, because you have far more knowledge about her condition and ability to affect it, and like, maybe you could give those $300 to the villagers and it might help something, but I think always you take care of your own sphere first. It's like if you're in a city and you take care of your own block first and make sure your block is in good working order and people there are happy and living fine, if everybody takes care of their own block first like that, then you have a good functioning working city. Whereas if you're trying to go across the city and intervene in other people's blocks, like you don't know if maybe they know something you don't know, that you don't have as much knowledge and as much power to do that. I keep thinking like of the liver. The liver should definitely keep doing its liver things first before it starts trying to pump my blood around, because the liver is better at its liver stuff, and I don't want it to be doing everything at once and thinking like, but the heart needs help. I'm going to help out the heart right now. Like, stick to your own thing, and then once your own situation is under control, then with extra resources you can start going further out and further out. But
okay, I think I could simplify this.
Like clean up your own house first kind of thing?
Yeah, or put on your own oxygen mask first.
Exactly.
When you're helping your sister or your community first, you're part of that.
Yeah.
I like the help put on your own oxygen mask for helping the person sitting next to you.
Yeah.
I mean, because you can't help the person next to you if you're starving for air. That's kind of the point, right? Mm-hmm. But then you're just like frantically grabbing their face, trying to keep them from getting their mask on. So like you get your shit together, then you can help other people.
Generalize that to a whole community.
Yeah.
I think like put on your own your community's oxygen mask before the one next to you.
The other thing that I like
when
about
your
these,
sister is breathing fine, then maybe your sister will finally be able to have the wherewithal to help other people near her put on oxygen masks or whatever, and it ripples outward from there.
I'm not sure. So I guess I don't entirely endorse this metaphor, right? Just because I think that if someone's far enough away from you, you don't really have an obligation to put on their oxygen mask, right? And I guess the thinking of it as an oxygen mask sort of puts in mind, the artist or the ICU nurse who is maybe going to be, like take care of yourself and then try to take care of others. Mm-hmm. I guess what I was saying is it's not so much that you should take care of yourself first and your communities first. It's that I actually think your obligation is in fact limited to other people, and it's not just that you do have a stronger obligation to people towards you, and maybe you should prefer them in that sense. But the thing that I was trying to say is that no, I actually think that for some far enough away, that doesn't happen to exist now, but has existed at times in the past and probably will again if we make it off this planet, right? That there will be people who are far enough away from you that you don't. It's not your job to care whether they have an oxygen mask on or not, and that you shouldn't feel bad about that. And
you don't think that exists right now?
I don't know. Reading. I mean, maybe it does.
Have you heard of Will McCaskill's latest book?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it, but no. Reading The Life, I'm not sure if I ever had a firm thought on this, but no. After reading The Life You Can Save, I don't think that exists in society as it is. I think that we're all interconnected enough that all human beings on Earth are part of vaguely at least some form of community that entails that you do have some sort of moral obligation to other people on the planet. Wherever they happen to be, because we have the means, the ability to affect them, and we do so anyway.
But it might be a very small obligation.
I think the obligation is small, and not,
I guess what I'm thinking,
not just in a percentage terms, but as a cap of your total interest expenditures, maybe.
Like specifically right now, I'm thinking about the women in Iran, since they are finally doing something about that entire fucking situation, and like I am very happy that people are finally fighting back against that regime there. But like, do I have an obligation? I'm assuming I don't have an obligation to fly over to Iran and riot in the streets with them. But do I have an obligation even to send money? If I did, where would I send it to? Or is my obligation entirely just like, yeah, you go. I'm glad that the regime is getting fucked. And if a politician wants to support them, then I will support that politician.
I mean, if you're asking me what I specifically think your obligation is there.
You're the one who said everyone has an obligation to everyone.
Yeah, so I don't think your obligation extends to trying to help people who are rioting against Khamenei in Iran. I think it'd be great if you wanted to do that, and if you feel like helping a lot because it's a cause that you care about more than others.
An obligation.
I don't think that you're morally obliged to help them overturn the regime. No, but like you might be morally obliged to. I don't know. It doesn't seem as bad as like people dying of malaria, right?
I mean, sure, but you said everyone has an obligation to everyone, so there's some obligation, or is there not? Because their situation isn't bad enough.
So I think like, yeah, that's fair. When I say has an obligation, I don't mean are obliged to help in whatever it is they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean have to factor their circumstances into your considerations with what you're doing.
Okay.
And
if all of the wind from our coal factories went straight over to some other country, it's like just because we can't see them doesn't mean that they're not suffering and that you shouldn't.
Right. No, that's a big thing.
In particular, I would say relative to other places in the world, even though the political regime really sucks there, mm-hmm. people in Iran seem to have it pretty good, relatively speaking, to some other places. Mm-hmm. And so it strikes me as distant enough. I mean, unless you have ties to Iran personally that I don't know about, that I don't have. Right?
I do not.
It strikes me as somewhere that is distant enough and not bad enough that you have a specific obligation to help.
Okay.
But I mean, this is my impression. I don't know.
Well, and your obligation might extend insofar that is, if their situation got sufficiently bad, then you're obligated to do. Then you do something, right?
Right.
Like that's where you start sending your charity dollars instead of if the situation got worse than malaria-stricken Africa, then Iran starts getting your charity money instead of malaria.
Right, yeah. Like I send some money to give well charities because it's like I feel like I have some obligation financially to do what I can to help people in other parts of the places that that are doing very badly, because it seems like they're doing very badly. But I don't know the circumstances, so I'm just going to try and contribute to people who do know the circumstances, who know how to help better.
I give to their maximum impact fund.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm like, I'm not going to even do the quarterly research on whatever the most important thing is. You guys are paid. You guys know what you're doing.
Yeah,
you guys spend it how you see fit.
If protesters in Iran wind up on there, then probably those people who spend all their time evaluating who's in most need of money probably know better than I would.
Okay. So how does virtue ethics tie into that?
So actually, that's a good time, because I want to bring up this is almost a non-answer, but I'll try to tie it back afterwards.
Fuck yeah.
It's because
those are the best kind of answers.
Yeah, because you asked me earlier also about the 12 virtues of Aristotle being specific things that, like, if you walk away with those, maybe you're not doing it right.
Right.
So there's this notion of what a virtue is in Alistair McIntyre's book After Virtue, which I really like a lot. And I'm going to try and read to you. So he has this notion of what he calls a practice. And I'm just going to read this here. By a practice, I am going to mean any coherent and complex form of socially established cooperative human activity through which goods internal to that form of activity are realized in the course of trying to achieve those standards of excellence which are appropriate to and partially definitive of that form of activity.
All right, give it to me in English.
It's still going.
Oh no!
With the result that human powers to achieve excellence and human conceptions of the ends and the goods involved are systematically extended. Okay, so what does that mean? So practice is it's complex, socially established, cooperative, human, right? So this is something that applies to human beings. It would not apply to AIs. Maybe AIs would have their own version of this. Cooperative, it involves other people. It's not something you just do on your lonesome, right? Through which goods internal to that form of activity. So a good is like, if suppose you're playing chess, a good internal, it's good like a good end, like a terminal sort of value within the context of chess, right? So it might be being better at chess, or it might be being a pillar of the chess community, but it probably would not be like
cheating at chess.
Winning at chess for candy or money. Right?
Yeah.
Because that would be external to chess. You're not doing it for chess, right? Being a pillar of the chess community also wouldn't be internal to chess, but it would be internal to sort of community participation. Okay. And it's not everything that's socially involved. It's only certain kinds of things that where you can extend your notion of the good by participating. I don't know. That's complicated. Let's ignore that part.
All right.
Right. So he says a virtue is an acquired human quality, the possession and exercise of which tends to enable us to achieve those goods which are internal to practices, and the lack of which effectively prevents us from achieving any such goods. So what you think about this, there are certain types of activities which are not all activities, but which generally anything that you do with people is going to be one. And if you think about getting better at that, and maybe it's board games. I mean, maybe it's like speed running, right? Like that's a thing you do by yourself, but you do it by trying to set records. And so I feel like it is part of this community that you're doing it.
Right.
Or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's farming and bringing your cows to the farm fair or whatever. But a virtue is something which makes you better at achieving goods internal to practices. So if the practice itself is evil, maybe there's not goods internal to it. Right, maybe like the competitive slave torture event, outside of a BDSM community where everything is voluntary or whatever. Like whatever, the competitive slave torture event is probably you're not going to be achieving goods internal to that practices, because what are they? But insofar as some practice has goods that you can achieve that are internal to it, a virtue is just something which makes you better at it. Which kind of is like, if you're really into something, then you're becoming a better person by being better at that thing. Because in order to become better at it, you have to develop virtues.
Okay.
Or maybe vice versa, anything that makes you better at it is a virtue.
Okay. So anything that makes you better at something that it's good to do is a virtue.
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah. I forgot the thing I was going to bring this back to. What was I going to bring this back to? What does that have to do with virtue ethics? What does notions about bounded responsibility to people on the other side of the world have to do with virtue ethics? So, I think that
isn't responsibility a virtue basically?
I think so. Yeah.
I think
if you're irresponsible, you're going to suck at a lot of things.
Yeah. I think in the idea of things being like a golden mean or whatever, like you can have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility where you feel
you're OCD.
Well, not just OCD, but I'm bringing up the example again of someone who abandons their family to help strangers because that was in the story that the ICU nurse wrote, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to drop names here or not, so I'm not going to. But there was a character who was abandoned by her father, and everyone loves her father because her father is this great virtuous person that goes to third world countries and helps other people and has saved dozens of lives, and yet she had no father and was abandoned in her childhood because he was doing that, and I think that's really shitty of him, and he's not a good person. So like the responsibility, if responsibility is a virtue, that is something that you can cultivate and grow in and get better at, and that'll prevent bad things like that.
Yeah, I think... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just thinking also of excessive responsibility, like the EAs who burn themselves out by trying to do more than than they're capable of.
Right.
I don't know if that's because that sounds like two kinds of being bad at responsibility.
I've even met people who are overly responsible in life to the point where they sort of cripple others' abilities to learn how to manage their own lives because they solve all of somebody else's problems for them.
Oh, that was me.
Okay.
Or continues to be me. I'm trying to get better at it, but yeah, I have a pathological rescuer caretaker trait.
And then the people will just end up using you as their crutch. I don't want to say crutch, but they become dependent on you, and that's not good either.
Why would they learn to fish if you're giving them fish every day?
You're a learned helplessness tutor.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, actually. I was going to say I'm teaching them helplessness.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so I guess what virtue ethics has to say about that might be that it seems like by McIntyre's definition of a practice, participating in it, just like being a member of society, is a practice. And maybe one of those goods internal to it is probably having a sense of, what you can do, what you can't, who you have strong obligations to versus weaker. This is, again, my own thinking. I haven't heard this elucidated anywhere, and maybe there are reasons why it's false that some listener will be happy to point out. But it seems to me that this person whose father went off to try and help people in need around the world while ignoring his own daughter had his heart was in the right place trying to help people, but his sense of who most needs my help in particular was maybe not very well developed, or was wrong about that. And so I think virtue ethics would say that that's also a thing that you need to develop. It's not just your sense of helping people, but also your sense of, who should I in particular help.
Does this book talk at all? So very few. I know almost nothing about virtue ethics. I just stumbled across something recently where someone was arguing that incompetence is bad in a different level of things that being good and bad at something are. Like, for example, children are often bad at some of the various virtues because they're children. They're still learning, right? And oftentimes you can be bad at something just because you didn't really realize that was a thing you had to work on. You find out later in life, oh, this is something important. I got to work on this too now. And so like you can be good or bad at chess in the same way you can be good or bad at courage, or you can be good or bad at responsibility, but you aren't necessarily a bad person if you're bad at a virtue. You're saying you're a bad person if you are incompetent at a virtue at a way that is just you don't care to improve yourself in that manner. And that a lot of virtue ethics is about doing the practice and the work, that virtues are like skills. You work at them to get better at them. You keep getting better at a guitar, the more you play a guitar. You keep getting better at being courageous or responsible, the more you practice being courageous or responsible. And the people who are actually bad people are the ones who don't do the practice, trying to get better at those virtues.
So I think we're maybe running into the long history of ethics having some definitions that aren't necessarily compatible. So I think it's perfectly fine to think in those terms, right? I think that these days we have a sense that whether a person is good or bad should be determined by sort of what they intend. I think that virtue ethics, as originally thought of, didn't have that at all, right? It's you can if you intend the right thing and you're always incompetent at doing it, you're not really you're bad at doing stuff, right? That makes you a bad person because you're bad at doing things.
Just picture a blacksmith who can't make a decent knife, even though they're really trying,
Yeah.
but like they refuse to learn the proper way of doing it. But their intention is to keep making a good one.
Are they
It's
therefore
like-
a good blacksmith?
Right?
No.
Yeah, not. So I think virtue ethics would not say that. But again, this maybe goes back to the split I was mentioning earlier between what motivates your sense of the good and what strategy do you have for pursuing it. I think it's totally fair and very valuable, no matter what your standpoint is, to consider virtues as skills as a sense of pursuing whatever ends that your ethical system says that you should, right? I think that virtue ethics, as maybe elaborated by Aristotle, wouldn't say that you are a good person if you always intend to do well, but you're just bad at it. If you keep trying to improve, he might say, yeah, you'll get better.
I was about to say, even a shitty blacksmith, if he keeps blacksmithing for 20 years, is going to get better at it, right?
Right, yeah. And so I think that that's a thing. But there's like some weird, like if you're just bad at things and you're bad at improving at them and there's like not any way to get better.
Inefficient improvement.
Right. Like I think, you could get better at getting better, right? That's also a thing. And that probably is a virtue as well. A lot of ethical systems, particularly the ones that rationalists like, and I think this includes both virtue ethics and utilitarianism, have some very tough pills to swallow, though, when we talk about good and bad like that. Like if somebody's just bad at everything, virtue ethics probably says, yeah, that makes you a bad person because that's what it means to be a bad person.
Yeah. If you're bad at courage and bad at responsibility and bad at
improving at those things,
and
bad at caring about improving at those things,
right.
Like, and I think utilitarianism might say something similar, right? Like, because it's this consequence orientedness. So if you intend to do these good things and they keep having bad consequences, right? Like, well, you're just responsible for all these bad things happening. That is on you. That's what you've done. And so if you evaluating a person as good or bad is maybe not a thing that utilitarianism tries to do. That's something that maybe we borrow from Christianity or from Kantianism and just slap it into this context where we're all trying to be utilitarians because it's hard for us not to think that way. Mm-hmm. But I think that if you are thinking that way and you are utilitarianism, you probably have to conclude, no, if you're so bad at stuff that your impact is negative, that is in fact what makes you a bad person.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you meant. Whereas
You're
if you're
bad
Bill
and you should
Gates
feel
and you
bad.
just have $1 billion and you can give that all to charity, that makes you a good person. And if you don't have $1 billion, sucks to be you, right? Like
Right.
same as if you're, born paraplegic and, mentally handicapped so that you can't even think about trying to improve at things and your body can't improve at things, then Aristotle would say, yeah, it sucks to be you.
But it's kind of, and that's a tougher example than just like the hypothetical made up person who just sucks at everything. But you mentioned before, like, a teleological lens on this, and it's like you're just actually not maximizing or even like approaching climbing the peak of like being good at being a person, right? And like, so we talked about like specific examples like blacksmithing or farming or whatever, and like if you suck at those, then yeah, you're not good at it. But if you can't do any of the things that like even you want to do as a person, like you're not
You're being the best you.
Yeah, you're actually just failing at being a person, like in a theological sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're failing at being a person generally. You're maybe failing at being you specifically. Maybe you're not failing at wanting the right things, right? Maybe that seems like that could be a virtue, is identifying which goods are actually important and worth pursuing. So I think that the blacksmith who fails to make something after 20 years, or the person who always wants to get, what was your example? Was it chess originally? It's like somebody wants to get better at the thing, but they're just incompetent at it.
I think could have been chess.
Yeah. That person isn't perfectly bad, right? Because they at least know, they're at least oriented towards, I want good things. I want to be better at things that are good and not worse at them, right? And so there's one virtue that they have, but they lack a lot of other ones.
I feel like, and maybe, I don't know if I should bring Adler and psychology into this, but there's something in particular that really bugs me about the type of person who is just an eternal aspirant. I don't know if I'm aspiring towards
Like someone who
I
always
just have to
aspires
do-
to be rational but never quite gets there.
Well, no, I mean like someone who wants to be a great author supposedly, and they have this identity of, like they go around talking about how they're going to write a great book someday, and then I was working on my writing for so long, but then they never actually do it because And there's like this whole thing, it should probably be a separate conversation, but like courage in the Adlerian sense. Like he would say that the good right thing to do would be to realize that you're hiding behind this, like you could publish the book and it might suck, and then you would have to face the fact that you're not a great writer. But you can,
or you could give up on writing and just do something else that you're actually good at.
but that would be hard. And it's easier for people to just, say, well, I could have, I've studied piano for 12 years. Oh man, I could have been like a composer. I could have, like judge other people who are bad at piano, talk about how much you love piano, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're using it for evil, sort of. Or, yeah.
That's one reason. I think that's a failure mode that I worry about in myself sometimes.
Oh yeah, same.
Yeah. I think that's one reason why I love this definition of practice that McIntyre gives, is because, and of virtue entailed by practice, is because I think wanting to be and aspiring to be and talking about being a great writer isn't a practice, but like being one probably is, or being a writer generally. And so things that make you better at wanting to be or aspiring to be a writer aren't, but being a writer, yeah, things that make you better at that are things that are worth doing. And that's like, it's almost like trying to cut the enemy, but for your activities. It's like, don't just faff about with the sword. Don't just faff about with telling people you're going to be a writer. Like, either do it and get better at it and practice trying to do that thing.
Or maybe I'll discover that I'm bad at it.
Yeah, or
and no matter how much I want to be a better blacksmith, I just should face the facts that I suck at it.
lay down your sword and hug your enemy, maybe, right? But like, don't just whack around with the sword not trying to cut him. Don't just faff around not writing a book.
Yeah, like you actually got to just, I don't know, put up or shut up, start writing, go to workshops, get eviscerated by your peers, and then get back in it.
And I think shut up is a valid option too. Like, I think shut up is a great option, because then you'll maybe focus on something that you're better at and you'll enjoy more.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing, you mentioned, like, as when you guys were talking about the kind of more generic, I'm blanking on any of the examples. I don't know what happened in my brain, but when I decided to go like finish an undergraduate degree, it was explicitly to internally with the goal of being seen to be doing something, not doing anything in particular, just doing something, so that I could say, "What are you doing with your life?" and I'd have an answer to that. Right? I'm going to school, which isn't actually a thing, right?
Yeah.
It's an activity that fills my day, but it's not something you're doing with your life, right? It was just a good placeholder.
You didn't decide that you wanted to do this thing, and going to school is the best way to get to that point.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if someone, say, perpetually stayed in school in that sort of state, it's like, oh, I'm figuring it out in this very prestigious way of like paying a ass ton of money to do it. That is a failure mode too, right? You're not actually getting better at anything other than telling people that you're planning on getting good at something.
Yeah. But I understand the kind of person who would be like an eternal student, because I'm interested in everything. Kind of, I know, like Kerry, you were saying, that's something that you fear about yourself. For me, it is for sure too, because I have way too many interests and I change careers all the time, and I keep like, I feel like I need to get better at just committing to one path.
For what it's worth, that's not what I was saying though. What I was saying is that, like, in my example, like, being a student is actually not doing anything. And so, like, if you're jumping around from career to career every 2 years, you're actually doing stuff.
Yeah.
And they're better. You could be better and worse at those things or whatever, but you're still actually doing things.
These are two different things, right? But
yeah. Because I just want to make clear that you're actually doing stuff, whereas like the me of years ago was not. And so
at least 2 years ago.
At least.
There's something about that I wanted to talk about too, where the whole concept of like, you're bad and you should feel bad, or like the reason that you did that wasn't, it was because if you weren't doing something, you knew that you would be judged.
Right.
And if someone asks, like, what are you doing with your life? And you're like, I'm in school. And they're like, oh, that's a good thing to be doing. And
exactly. But it saves you without having to actually do anything, right?
It does seem like school's not the worst choice for that. There are things that you could go do that maybe you could tell people that would sound cool. That would be, I don't know how you feel about school, right? I don't know if you use anything that you learned in school, like in your work or your day-to-day life, or you appreciate it. But I feel like school is one of those things where people often do it just because it's the thing to do, and also because it's like, whatever college required for all these jobs now, which is terrible. that don't need the degree specifically. But
my art bachelor's degree has gotten me a bunch of jobs that I wouldn't have that are completely unrelated.
right, yeah, like I think there's a sense that a lot of people go to school because it's the thing to do, and then maybe find a vocation while they're at school. And I don't know how typical this is, but it does happen at least sometimes, right? Which means that school strikes me as not the worst thing to do. In the same way that maybe, what are you doing with your life? Oh, I'm just at some job that pays me a lot of money right now. That might be also a good answer to that question, even if it's not something you really care about, because you might find later, oh, hey, I discovered this thing I really care about, and boy, it's convenient to have this money.
Yeah.
Right. And, to be clear, like I like the vibe of like anything approaching like the idea of an academy, right?
Yeah.
Like I love the vibe of people being there to learn, and I like learning. Like I think that's an intrinsic good, basically, right? It's pleasurable for a lot of people, and it's nice to. And so, like as far as being a perpetual student, I guess like there are ways to do it where like you're not using that as a placeholder for doing like real life stuff, and you can learn all the time at home too.
Yeah.
And so like I'm not necessarily putting down school for every purpose for every person. It was specifically the way that I did it, which I didn't learn anything there that I took to a real job or anything. But I was there and I did enjoy the stuff, like I liked being in school. I like being in lectures, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like all that stuff's fun. But so like, you're right. There are worse ways to do it. If I was also having a bad time, that would have been a worse way to do it. Right. Whatever example that could have been. So, I forget how this related to, we were talking about the, McIntyre definition.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, that's a thing too, is if you're out of school or you're doing something just to do it, maybe it's better to choose something that you have heard of people discovering new things to care about as a result of doing that thing, right? Because that's one of the biggest advantages, I think, of virtue ethics over utilitarianism, even though they're not really for the same thing, I think, in some ways. But one thing that I think that virtue ethics does a great job at is leaving open the idea that you might discover something new that it means to be good, right? Some new practice, some new virtue that wasn't in any of the things that you were doing before, some new way of flourishing and being your best you, as it were. That utilitarianism doesn't. And if you're at school or if you're faffing about, to have a good answer to the question, what are you doing? It might be good to have something that not only is a good answer, but also is something that has a reputation for exposing people to new notions of the good, so that you might find something to pursue.
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe you go to college and then you learn about, you learn about rationality or EA stuff, and so you go get in that, and then, that's not why you were at college, but that's a thing that came out of it, and those are things that can come out of it.
I love that. That's great. Yeah.
This is going to sound stupid, but I think pursuing things that will get you laid more is almost always a good proxy for things that you should do if you don't know what else you're going to do, because almost all of them are either skills that are admirable or your own personal health or social ability, and like all those things generalize to positives. Even if your only goal was to get laid more, it's still probably gonna work out as long as you aren't doing stupid bullshit.
I need to point out that what Ines just said made Kerry go for the book and open up. So I'm really curious what we got here.
I think I agree.
Oh.
I agree with that very much. And I also think, what is this? By a practice, I am going to mean coherent and complex form of socially established cooperative human activity through which goods internal to that form of activity are realized.
Okay.
Sounds like seduction to me. Right?
Nice.
It's coherent. It's complex. You realize goods internal to it, like, I don't know, getting laid.
Orgasms.
Yeah, like there are things that make you better at it. Probably most of those are going to be virtues. Maybe
There's like good and bad ways, I would say, as well. I mean, like obviously there's like drugging and date raping someone, but there's also being a pickup artist, like that's learning to psychologically manipulate women versus genuinely like becoming a good conversationalist.
Right. I'm so glad you pointed that out. I was going to say dark arts doesn't count.
Yeah.
No, I think the manipulative PUA is not engaging in a cooperative practice, right?
Right.
And I think likely also that's true for the date rapist. Like those are bad, and they're bad in a way that this definition makes sense for, which is why I keep, every time I look at this definition, it's like, but what about? Oh yeah, hey, it works.
Cool.
That's why I keep using examples instead of.
Examples are better.
Yeah. Like a thing that I wanted to talk about, unless there's like more that we haven't covered that you wanted to discuss. But there's the thing that keeps coming up for me is sort of the idea of how responsible should you be for shaming others, or I keep thinking about the you're bad and you should feel bad. Like,
That's the thing actually Aristotle talks about in this book.
yeah,
What is
I
that,
was
like-
curious about that.
The virtue of imposing justice or something?
No, it's like
you
honor
call
and
that?
glory. He talks about that because in ancient Greece, people still talked about that instead of like making weird noises about status.
Right.
And he basically says like, if you're pursuing honor, honor can't be the highest good because we award honor and respect to people for reasons.
Yeah.
And must be those reasons that are why we're doing the honor. So like those must be better, right? But what is it? He says pursuing those things is often good because because if you achieve them, it probably means that you have the virtues that are worth having, which is why people are giving you the honors. And oh my gosh, I actually forgot the thing that Jace just said that I was riffing on that I was going to bring this back to.
I was thinking about
Shaming people for not having their virtues?
yeah,
Yes.
or even like punishment in the game theoretic sense. The reason that the first thing that you mentioned, Ash, was fairness. When you're just trying to think of virtues, and you're like, well, I value fairness, and it made me think of that whole the sort of there's an instinct that's built into humans to punish others, and it's even in animals, like for defecting, and the reason is obvious, but anyway, sorry, I'm going too far afield. What were you going to say, Kerry?
No, I think what I said was going. I was trying to riff off of you, right? So I think that yeah, we do punish each other when we do bad things, and we do try to reward each other when we do good things, and that's good. It's good to punishing the bad and rewarding the good. That's the most primitive notion of justice I think that there is.
I wonder if Jace, were you trying to get towards asking like, is there ever any possible virtuous reason to dogpile someone on Twitter? Is that what you're asking?
I mean, actually,
There's no virtuous reason to be on Twitter at all, he says as he was on Twitter earlier today.
Well, but I mean, if you're there, again, getting honor and esteem from people for saying smart things, and that's probably correlated with actually sharing smart things, right?
Twitter is weird in that it's very much what you put into it is what you'll get out of it. So you can just get the most horrific, dog shit, awful stuff on Twitter. But also you find some very insightful, interesting people that are just like, here's a thing that I discovered today while doing my genetic research job. And I'm like, that's cool. I wish you would have written in a blog post, but a 12-part Twitter thread works too, I guess.
And sometimes they're the same people. Most of the time they're the same people. That's the worst part.
Oh,
yeah, I realize I have an internal inconsistency here with this though, where like I believe you when you say yeah, it's good to reward and punish people, but then okay, maybe it's not that inconsistent, but I prefer sort of the same method of like child rearing or animal training where you only reward good behavior and you ignore bad behavior. But I guess ignoring a behavior is still a form of punishment.
Or it's at least not rewarding.
You could think of that as punishment relative to the hedonic set point. Like
Yeah.
if you reward something all the time, then you're then when you fail to give a reward, that's a kind of punishment.
Yeah.
Because someone adjusts to the reward being there.
So
I don't know if that works with children though. Is it like you're just suspending them halfway? Their hedonic set point is trying to adjust to being more rewarded, and then every time they do something bad, it's like no.
well, children crave attention, so if you ignore them, that's definitely a punishment.
Yeah.
But this is semi-related. I believe this is true. I might actually have to check up on whether the if my cat psychology knowledge is up to date. With dogs, you can definitely train them with punishment because dogs feel guilt and cats don't. If you punish a cat, it doesn't change their behavior at all. Like they don't care about your opinion. They don't try to. Yeah, it's funny because dogs have this like built-in need to please, and like.
yeah.
Anyone who's ever, met a dog knows that they feel like excessive guilt, shame about being bad, and they want to be good boys. And cats don't give a shit about whether or not you think they're a good or bad cat.
Awesome.
But you can train them with rewards only.
Well, we're getting close to 2 hours. Is there more things we want to touch on here?
I know a friend of the podcast, Jenkins, asked me, based on conversations that I've had with him in the past, why would I go all the way to virtue ethics and not stop at something like preference utilitarianism? But I guess I think that I've made that clear, which is that I think they're 4 different things. I think they do different things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you were to ask like, a modern utilitarian, how can I be a good person at my job? they'd, we can kind of anticipate the answers they would give. If you want us talking to be like, if you ask a virtue ethicist talking to be good at my job, you can get some like actual advice, right? Like, have a good attitude, say, speak up when something's not working, be a cooperative team member, stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. And all that is correlated with stuff I think that the utilitarians would say, but it's more internally focused, Also, another way you could be good at your job, if you're asking a virtue ethicist, is to like your job, right? Which isn't a requirement if you're utilitarian.
Try to not just do the things, right? And not do them because they're good or not. Who cares why you're doing them? But try to become the person who does them without even thinking about it. Mm-hmm. So that they're character traits instead of just things you choose.
Yeah. I think that maybe this is a good kind of wrap up conversation bit, but like one criticism I remember, because I did take all the philosophy classes in college, but I didn't like do anything with it. But I remember like this was a common thing that people, like virtue ethics is vague. And that's kind of come up a bit, right? And that's pointed at it like it's a bad thing. And I get that it's not great that, here's this instruction book with no actual hard instructions in it. But I think that actually I don't think that's actually a bad thing, because like life is complicated and like there isn't going to be like a one rule fits all situations thing. So it's just like, although if there is one, it's really close to what McIntyre said. I love that.
I think what McIntyre said is also pretty vague, and I agree. But I like that.
It's exactly as vague as necessary to basically encompass everything, but not so uselessly vague as like whatever, maximize the categorical imperative, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't tell me like, all right, well, how much money should I give to this, to this charity? Do I give anything?
You want to be a little bit vague because you don't know what the highest, like the maximum good is, right? And so if you pick the wrong one, you're effectively going to be paperclipping.
Yeah.
And so you want to be a little vague about it in a way that enables you to discover and get closer to what that is.
Yeah, I think where people get tripped up in philosophy is even the virtues that Aristotle, I guess, like, said these are the virtues and then these are the like corruptions of the virtues. Some of those felt kind of forced, and I feel like it was trying too hard to make everything fit a system.
Aristotle's classic move is here's a category of things. Let's subdivide it into 4 categories of things and then name them all.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, what would you, I guess, is there a list of virtues? Is virtues more kind of a squishier, you know them when you see them thing? Like, what do you consider the virtues that humans should aspire to, or how people find out what virtues are?
That's a good question. I don't come here with a list of virtues. Mm-hmm. I think there's a list of virtues of rationality is a good one. I think Aristotle's is also a good one. I mean, they're for different things, different situation. I don't have a list to read here, and I don't have a person who has a list to point anybody to. But
I don't like lists at all.
Yeah, I guess when you see
more
it,
of a how do you?
I would say
determine?
I think courage is probably the most important virtue.
Huh. Okay.
Because
Adler would agree.
because you need courage to act, right?
Yeah.
And all other virtues are habits of character, which are actions that you take automatically that are you've sort of made into a part of your personality. Mm-hmm. And anything you do in the world is going to take action. And so whether that's embodying a virtue, whether that's calculating utility, whatever, doing things is going to take courage because you need to take action. And so I think if there's one thing about virtues specifically, it might be cultivate the virtue to act.
Yeah. I like courage. I like curiosity. I like rationality, responsibility. Like, I don't have a list, but I think there's some things that you can identify as like, yeah, that is definitely a virtue, and it would be good if I were to cultivate that in myself.
Yeah. I mean, I think if anybody just finds a list of virtues that they like I know Charlie mentioned once that she has the 12 virtues of rationality taped on the wall behind her computer, mm-hmm. and we'll look at it sometimes and be like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Mm-hmm. Or like, how's this one? Or just being inspired by it. And mm-hmm. I think that, anyone who's interested in that, I think if you find a list of virtues that appeal to you, you're probably not doing it wrong.
Okay.
So if that's something that somebody wants to do, they shouldn't worry about, but is this the right list of virtues? If it's Aristotle's and that's the one that really gets you fired up, go for it.
Yeah. And if you do have a list and then someone brings your attention to another virtue, you can just add it in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, oh, you're right. That's a big deal, and I should focus on that. Cool.
What's your favorite virtue, Jace, if you had to pick one to put on the list?
Well, my favorite is curiosity, but I feel like that one comes easiest for me, whereas...
That's a good reason for it to be the favorite, too.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I'm working on trust, because I have... Or rather, like, maybe it's the same thing. Positivity, or yeah, I know like I'm pathologically underconfident, and
That might be courage.
maybe courage. Yeah, yeah, okay.
I like it. No, I think positivity. That's kind of what I was thinking about. Was like
It's not the right word. There's something I was trying to get at there.
no, but it sparked what I was thinking of, which was like I don't know. I guess when in doubt, be nice to people and be really humble about how sure you are that you shouldn't be nice to them. Like so, be doubtful most of the time. Like you don't know what someone's day is. You know, if someone in a job is being shitty to you, like maybe they're a shitty person and that's how they are to everybody all the time, or maybe they're having the worst day of their life and you don't know, right? Mm-hmm. So like if it doesn't cost you much to just extend the benefit of the doubt and be nice, I think that's a good way to do it. But of course, again, you can find extremes on the away from that golden mean, right? You can be nice to Hitler on his worst day, you know, open the door for him on his way to do his job, right? Or you can, I guess, be a dick to everybody. What is the vice of being nice? If you were to go the other way with it,
I think he has obsequiousness. Actually,
that's a solid word.
Yeah, like you're just like bending over backwards to like
Perfect.
being
Everyone all the
servile.
time. Yeah, that was
I think
does
we've all
not
been
get
there.
does not get you what you want ultimately.
No.
It may take a while to
It's
find
not,
that
not
out.
good for you either, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I get why they call it bending over backwards because it's doable, but it really hurts and it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The biggest problem is that there's more than one person in the world. You could be the ultimate, doing everything for one person, but as soon as there's two people, then sometimes their desires are in conflict, and then you got to choose.
Then the stronger one gets what they want, right?
No, good point. Yeah.
I think we all said what we think the most important or favorite virtue is, except for you, Inyaj.
Damn it! I was hoping you'd miss me. I mean, I don't want to just say courage because I do think that's the one, but then we've only got 3 out of the 4 of us. I think courage is the most important one, as you said, but I'm also a really big fan of whatever the version of the Protestant work ethic as a virtue is. Industry. Okay, yeah. Just fucking working on things and not giving up, because lots of hard work is the only way things get done, and you can do a fucking lot if you just keep doing it every day.
Yeah. I guess maybe there's a case for like love or charity too. Like in the Christian virtues of faith, love, and charity, or faith, hope, and charity.
Absolutely, love should be right
Faith,
up
hope,
there.
and love. I don't remember. Yeah, love's good.
Yeah, love's a very good one. All right, shall we wrap it up?
Sure. Yeah, we're not doing sequences this week because we forgot. So
Unless you guys want to do tomorrow's Zencaster, call in real quick and do them, or do you want to just skip them entirely?
there's a possibility we'll do sequences this week, but not right now.
Okay, great.
All right.
Hey, Steven, welcome back.
Hey, Inyash, welcome again.
Yes, we are going to do the less wrong posts because we chiseled out some time in our schedules to do that, although Jace couldn't join us, so it'll just be you and me.
Not too much to cover. These are memorable but quick ones, I think.
Yes, but we didn't want to leave our listeners hanging with no less wrong posts for a week, because we only put out 2 of these a month roughly, so.
Yeah, it would be killer.
Yeah. All right, so the first one is, but there's still a chance, right? Which I'm pretty sure is a Dumb and Dumber reference.
I was just going to say, it has to be.
Yeah, great movie, very fun. I mean, very stupid. It lives up to its title, but a lot of fun.
I really need to see it again. I haven't seen it in ages. I wonder if it holds up.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, maybe not. I don't know.
I bet parts do. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, what's the gist here? I mean, in a sentence, it's that, probability approaches 0 is, you can just say it's 0.
Yeah.
Even though mathematically it's not, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds us that this was at the time during the atheism wars at the very beginning, because he's talking with a theist who refuses to accept evolution and says that maybe the human and the chimp DNA is just very similar by coincidence. And Eliezer said that gave him a couple insights into the laws of thought as seen by what he calls the unenlightened ones, and which I think we refer to as normies. But I think the unenlightened ones, he's got to do the turns of phrase. He can't just call them normies. That would be too cringe for a new religion leader or whatever.
There's also just a bit of salt. He just doesn't usually talk down to people. I think this guy in particular grind his gears.
Yeah, F this guy. So the first thing that he learned from this particular thing is that human intuitions make a qualitative distinction between no chance and a very tiny chance but worth keeping track of. And the problem is that probability theory sometimes lets us calculate a chance which is too tiny to be worth the mental space to keep track of it, but by that time you've already calculated it. And the thing he said in here that like stuck with me for quite a long time, and then I forgot it because I just haven't run into people who think like this in a long time. So, lost it from disuse. But the thing he said here was that we can use words to describe numbers that are that small, but not feelings, because a feeling that small literally doesn't exist. For it to be as small of a feeling equivalent to the smallness of the chance that you couldn't fire enough neurons to release enough neurotransmitters to feel anything. Like once you get really small to like the levels of winning the lottery, your chances are less than how many neurons are in the brain. So you'd have to fire less than one neuron to feel the appropriate feeling of what your chances are, which you can't do. So it's that's a problem with humans' brains, where you just can't feel how improbable it is in proportion to how improbable it is.
It'd be like if I handed you a single atom of lead to put on your palm,
Yeah, right.
And it's like, if you say so, I mean, but like we're just not wired physically or computationally to handle stuff that infinitesimal. Yeah. And especially, and like the thing is, I think like he's getting at that, when you're motivated, that teeny tiny chance, you're like, oh, well, that is literally a chance. I just said it, right? So I think people are inclined to lean for that, but it's a cautionary lesson that you should try to avoid doing that.
Yes. He said also the second thing that he learned about how the normies think is that there's a qualitative distinction between certain and uncertain arguments, where if an argument is not certain, you're allowed to ignore it. And that includes for infinitesimal probabilities like this. And he says that, like, if you're going to say you can't prove me wrong, like, if you're just going to ignore a probabilistic counter-argument to that extent, why not ignore a proof too? Like, they're basically indistinguishable.
Yeah, it's interesting because people, and this is again an artifact of the atheism wars, but like when people are motivated, they will, at least in my experience, they would forget and throw out the very laws of thought and logic, and not just like logic and facts, but like seriously all A are B, all B are C, all A are C, like level thinking, right?
Yeah,
and it's weird. I mean, at some point, you're not having a conversation with somebody who is open to a conversation. Like, I think if somebody who is otherwise amenable to reason and then buys lottery tickets, this is like the kind of thing you can be like, hey, look, you realize, look at the numbers. And yes, that feels like a chance, but it's not. I think that might sink in there. But if somebody's really determined, this isn't going to shake them.
Yeah.
It might, though. And I don't want to push this prematurely, but the next one might.
You think the fallacy of gray one?
Yeah, I like that one a lot. This
it was a good one.
You want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Because it piggybacks off this one very well. The next post being the fallacy of gray, which starts out with a quote, but two people talking to each other, the sophisticate and the I don't even know what that other word is. The guy who's a different guy. Anyways, the sophisticate says the world isn't black and white. No one does pure good or pure bad. It's all gray. Therefore, no one is better than anyone else. And his interlocutor says, knowing only gray, you conclude that all grays are the same shade. You mock the simplicity of the two-color view, yet you replace it with a one-color view.
That is the quote that I remembered utilizing, and I wish I'd found like a year, when closer to when it came out. I probably found it 2 or 3 years later. Mm-hmm. But like, because I had argued with moral relativists, mm-hmm. and it wasn't so much like arguing about the superiority of my morals, because I was super into philosophy. I didn't really have hard morals. I just knew that some were wrong, and so
right.
That one sentence there, you mock the simplicity of a two-color view, but you replace it with a one-color view.
Yeah,
like that was like, oh man, this is the perfect distillation of what I'm trying to communicate here, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's only 1,000 shades of gray, and then there's another quote way later on that I liked that illustrates the same point again.
The Gandhi and Stalin one?
That's the one.
Yeah. He says, someone says everyone is imperfect, and Eliezer comments, yeah, Gandhi was imperfect and Stalin was imperfect, but they were not the same shade of imperfection.
Right. In the spirit of virtue ethics, I was thinking about, a bad person can have virtues, right?
Yeah.
And a good person can have vices. So it's like, I'm sure Stalin did some things right. I know less about him than I do other world leaders or dictators at the time, or like whatever.
We know less about him than Hitler, basically.
Probably, yeah.
Because everyone knows that Hitler was a vegetarian and loved animals.
I wonder if that's even true, just because it's such a popular belief. But let's pretend it is.
Shit.
And
okay,
yeah, like so the guy liked dogs, and he liked art, whatever, right? And maybe Stalin was like cunning and smart, right? Like things that a lot of us would aspire to have.
He was very good looking.
That too.
He eliminated literacy and homelessness, apparently.
You said eliminated literacy.
Oh, illiteracy. I'm sorry.
Mission accomplished. No one could correct me because no one could read.
If he eliminated literacy by starving to death all the illiterate people, that's not really great.
Or burning all the books. There's nothing to read. Yeah.
All right. Fucking Stalin.
So what else is going on in this post?
So this he ties it back to the previous post, saying that like of the previous guy, the one that was like, you can't, there's still a chance. To him, all probabilities were simply uncertain, and that meant he was licensed to ignore them if he pleased. So yeah, again, the same kind of, they're all gray no matter how different the certainty is. And he says that like this, it's easy to make fun of like the religious people, but like this extends even into academia, because in his experience, many bloggers said of overcoming bias that it's impossible. No one can completely eliminate bias. And he says, yeah, well, that which I cannot eliminate may well be worth reducing. You can try to minimize that effect, or you can do things that are bound to increase it. So
it has to make you wonder if the people who make that objection, because I've heard that too, right? Oh, you can't make it perfect. And it's like, yeah, so? Like, I wonder if that is an original thought, and I'm not like belittling anyone who's ever said that, but like if that is an original thought that someone came to after careful deliberation, or if they just heard it somewhere. Because I think that like that's not true of anything else, right?
No.
Like I can't eliminate whatever toxins in my
sadness.
Food. Well, sadness.
Yeah.
But like radiation. I can't eliminate that because I go outside. But I'm not going to stand in front of a goddamn X-ray machine like all day, right?
Yeah.
I work in a doctor's office and take X-rays. I'm still going to stand behind the other wall and say, well, you can't eliminate X-rays. What's the point, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can't eliminate all the gross stuff in your drinking water. You should just drink from this disgusting pond.
Yeah.
That logic that doesn't stand anywhere else.
I think it's specifically because like people assume some level of hubris. They're like, oh, you're trying to get rid of your bias. You're trying to be better than us. Well, that's impossible. And it's like, it's good to try to be better and stop being so fucking defensive if you aren't trying to do it.
Yeah,
or at least don't try to, like shit on people who are.
I mean,
we are trying to improve our virtues.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone listening to this will ever be able to compete with like Mike Tyson on boxing ability, but some people no doubt are practiced martial artists. Just because you can't be the best ever doesn't mean that you can't be really good, and that it's really good to be good.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't learn everything. You should just throw that book away, like, it's funny. The more examples I think of, right?
Yeah.
You can't, run 1,000 miles. You shouldn't try running one.
He brings up another example, which is, I guess, kind of relevant to the time and maybe to the practice of rationality too. He says, likewise, the folly of those who say every scientific paradigm imposes some of its assumptions on how it interprets experiments, and then act like they'd proven science to occupy the same level with witch doctoring. Every worldview imposes some of its structure on its observations, but the point is that there are worldviews which try to minimize that imposition, and worldviews which glory in it. There is no white, but there are shades of gray that are far lighter than others, and it is folly to treat them as if they were all on the same level. And this kind of stuck out to me when I read it, because he was talking about the atheism wars of it's decade and a half ago, but does that not sound a lot like the people who are nowadays saying that science is colonial whiteness or whatever?
I haven't actually, I basically got off the internet before people started making that noise, so I don't quite know what they're saying, but I've heard something like that. And yes, I think it is something to the extent of like, oh, it's got their biases and stuff in it. And no doubt tons of it does. Like, you can be mindful of that, right? But it doesn't mean like it's all bullshit.
Right.
It means that, hey, when we're looking at this, let's keep in mind that, this study that was done on 20, 17-year-olds in 1961 might not apply. And there were, to 20 well-to-do young men in 1961 doesn't necessarily apply to everybody in 2022.
Yeah.
Like, so it's useful to keep that sort of stuff in mind, but like, it doesn't mean that we can throw out the edifice of like everything we know. Like at the end of the day, and this is what always got me, because if you argued with the hyper religious back in the day, they would eventually like retreat to, well, it's all faith, it's all bullshit, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dude, planes still fly.
Right.
Like, well, it was great. One of these was on a forum that was like a class online forum after class. You could go on and everybody could see the discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dude, we're having this conversation at the speed of light from wherever you live to wherever I live, and we could both be on separate airplanes if we wanted to be. Like, someone like there's some stuff that isn't understood to make this happen, right?
Mm-hmm,
this isn't merely just like hope and lies.
Yeah.
And
I mean, they can call it colonial science or colonialism science or whatever, and say that there's other ways of knowing that. Okay, yes, sure, that's all valid, but who was it that got rid of polio? Because there's some specific reasons that that the scientific method does work, which it didn't share with other ways of knowing things. And cultural evolution learns a lot and can do a lot, as we were just talking about in the virtue ethics. Like the ethical systems have evolved over multiple millennia at this point and have been refined and to make societies work, better. But there's a lot to be said for systemic process of elimination and testing and experimentation. You can learn a lot from that too, that maybe you could get through many millennia of evolution or just a few decades of testing various things that might kill bacteria.
So is the claim of these people not just that like science is tainted by whiteness or whatever, but it's like there are other equally valid ways of knowing stuff, and like, we shouldn't trust one over the other?
I mean, it depends on who you ask, and you can find anyone on the internet that'll say something stupid. But yes, there are people that have said that are in some position of not just being random Joe.
Okay. I mean, that's weird. I thought it was like the first one I can at least get behind, like not like, again, get gung-ho about, but I can understand and sympathize with. The second one, like, there are definitely truths that are important to people that aren't best learned through a randomized controlled trial.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I can totally. I'm super important with that, but I don't think that there are, I don't know, hard facts about nature that are best learned in those ways.
Yeah,
right. If it like everything that it's a hard fact about nature, you want to learn through a randomized controlled trial or some sort of an experiment and observation, right?
Yeah,
you don't want to learn it through like careful introspection and good discussion. Like that's not how you learn. I don't know how to crash a satellite into a asteroid.
Exactly. Like, I mean, science nowadays, especially, medical and sociological science, very fucked. Absolute lots of crises, a lot of things not replicating. And seems a lot of people just don't know a fucking thing about anything. But on the other hand, it is really fucking useful for some things. And just because the people who did it were white doesn't mean that it didn't actually do a really good job of learning some things and helping us, affect the world.
Didn't we just cure malaria in the last few weeks?
We have just developed a very cheap and effective vaccine, but right. It still needs to be deployed.
Right. We haven't eradicated it, but we have the tools to kill it. Well, I guess to kill it beforehand. It's not like a treatment when you've got it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like soon malaria will be gone the way of polio, and that's awesome. And this wasn't done through careful contemplation in a cave. This was done through rigorous years and years of focused science.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Hail science.
Hell yes, indeed. Let's see what we're going to say. I guess the other things I pulled out are already things we've touched on.
I think this last quote is a good closer.
Okay.
I don't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
I was going to say science is based on faith too. So even though calling something that you've previously seen and predicted to 12 decimal places versus expecting something to happen that violates the order previously observed, calling them both seems a little too unnarrow, is what he said. And he particularly called out the thing like, if science is a religion, then maybe you gotta watch out here and not say that, because it's the religion that heals the sick and reveals the secrets of the stars, and the priests of science blatantly, publicly, and verifiably walk on the moon as their faith-based miracles, and your priests can't do the same. So you sure you want to go there?
That would have been a nice one to have in my pocket back when I was having these arguments. That was funny.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because, like, the sun will rise in the east and this lottery ticket's a winner are both probabilistic statements, right?
Yes.
And that's closer to the point you made it before, which is like, if you're going to anchor on like a teeny probability, why not also just like say, well, this super probable thing is also probably, it might not happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, might not, but let's be real, right? Mm-hmm. I'll bet you everything you have, or rather, I'll bet you $10 from you versus everything I have that the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow. Right?
Yeah.
Now, granted,
sounds like a good way to lose $10.
Right. If you can somehow, make it so that everyone decides that direction is north or something, then yeah, I think you've earned all of my stuff.
Okay.
All right. We've got the last one here was from, let's see, a commenter, G2, points us to Asimov's relativity of wrong. And when the people thought that Earth was flat, they were wrong. When people thought that Earth was spherical, they were wrong. But if you think that thinking the Earth is spherical is just as wrong as thinking of the Earth as flat, then your view is wronger than both of them put together. And the goal is to try to be less wrong in stuff that you do, right?
Yeah, not increasingly more wrong.
I love it.
I have one thing I pulled out that kind of struck me as interesting, which is not actually on the topic of this at all. So I put it at the very end here because basically we're done talking about the post, and you just capped it off with a great cap. But this was something like a personal thing. There, in the middle of the post, within a parenthetical, he says, "Whenever someone says to me perfectionism is bad for you, I reply, I think it's okay to be imperfect, but not so imperfect that other people notice." I remember really loving this line when I first read it, 15 years ago? More now? About 15 years ago. And I cheered, and I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I want to be. Always be more efficient, more effective, more precise. Try to always be better, do better, be less wrong, right? And I mean, I think that's good. It is, you always want to practice your virtues. You always want to become a better human and the best you that you can be, right? But on the other hand, nowadays, the line, it's okay to be imperfect, but not so imperfect that other people notice, it almost feels, I would not cheer this line anymore. I would be like, this is someone who is not in touch with the core of humanness, where you have to acknowledge you're a flawed, semi-broken animal that is doing the best it can in this world, and just accept that there's a lot of crappy shit about you and you're doing your best to overcome it, but other people are going to notice, and that's okay. And we still love each other, even though we are all broken and flawed, and we try to help each other. And it's you shouldn't be ashamed of other people noticing you're imperfect, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
I've become more of a hippie.
No, I mean, I when I read this, today, I assumed that he was saying it tongue in cheek. There's no way that this seems like the kind of thing that that Harry would say, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was a Harry. I was an optimizing nerd. I was like, yes, I would want to be so close to optimal that people won't notice the few imperfections I have left.
I don't know. I think Harry had it, where he didn't broadcast his weaknesses, but he talked to people about things that he was wrong about and struggled with, Quirrell, I think, took it too far. But I guess what I'm thinking is Yudkowsky makes public bets,
right?
And I don't think he gets all of them right.
Yeah,
so, that is public imperfection, unless you're I mean, I guess it's not clear what perfection means then, because the whole virtue of admitting you're wrong and changing your mind is something that we tout as a good thing.
Yes,
and it
absolutely.
is. And so but I don't think that's imperfect. I feel like imperfect is doing some sidestepping here.
Yeah, I don't know. I noticed this drastic shift between who I am now and who I was then, and now I feel a lot more accepting both of my own flaws and others, and thinking that's one of the beautiful things that makes people different and interesting.
Well, hell yeah! No, I'm super into it. I think there's reason to put it in parenthetical because I think that is supposed to be a joke.
Okay.
Because, like I said, there's no way he really thinks that. I mean, maybe he does, but there's no way that I really think that. I think it's funny. I think it's a funny line to drop if you're, writing a witty character or making a joke. But
yeah, but I don't know. That's fair. I wonder if he would still drop that line today, or if he has changed too. I know we've talked before about how weird it is that the people who we were in the past are dead, but this, I wonder if he also thinks that, that was a different person who wrote that, and I don't agree with it now. Or if he's like, no, I was pretty right on, and that's fine too. I'm curious how much he's changed, and I wish I could interview him just to ask him those things.
Yeah, I don't have a good model of Eliezer that I can be confident in what he thinks, but I at least know what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. Did we mention on the show? Oh no, because when we did the actual episode, we thought we might not do these, so we got to see what we're doing next time.
Oh yes, for next time, our 2 lesser on posts will be Absolute Authority and Infinite Certainty.
That sounds great.
Yeah, those sound like awesome chapters in a sci-fi novel or something.
Yeah, let's get some of that Infinite Certainty. Not just some.
No.
Some certainty I think would be plenty, but infinite, man, stoked.
I don't even know what we're going to do with that much certainty.
Well, we'll noodle on it for a couple weeks.
Excellent.
All right.
Cool. All right. Thanks for joining me. I'll edit this into the episode.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks.
We do have time, of course. Never don't have time to thank a patron. This week we have, or this fortnight. I always say week.
Yeah,
whatever.
It is the week.
It is this week,
yeah.
Right? It just won't be next week. It'll be the week after.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Anyway, Luis Campos. This is yours. Your shout out. We really appreciate the support. You're awesome, and
you have the virtue of generosity.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
And the virtue of helping other people discover our podcast. And yeah, thanks. You're a good person. We like you a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, helping the community. What was the definition of virtue?
Oh, God.
I think it's worth getting one more time. This is great.
Fair enough.
All right. A virtue is an acquired human quality, the possession and exercise of which tends to enable us to achieve those goods which are internal to practices, and the lack of which effectively prevents us from achieving any such goods.
Thank you very much for that. For everybody else, if you are not a patron, you can support us on Patreon. There's links in the show notes. If you can't do that, then you can always just tell other people about our podcast, rate and review us, do all those good things. We love you guys. This is an awesome way to spend my Sundays and to spend my life. And I'm happy for all of you here in the room with me doing this. And I'm happy for everyone who listens to us too. That makes all this possible.
Hell yeah. Solid ending note. All right. Mic drop.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
You want to pull it out?
Yeah, let me pull it out.